Hello dear fans. How the Cold War began. The Cold War is a global economic, military, geopolitical and ideological confrontation between the USSR and the United States, which was based on deep contradictions between the socialist and capitalist systems. The confrontation between the two superpowers, in which their allies also took part, was not a war in the literal sense of this concept. The main weapon here was ideology. For the first time, the expression Cold War was used in his article You and the Atomic Bomb by the famous British writer George Orwell. In it, he accurately described the confrontation between the invincible superpowers possessing atomic weapons, but agreeing not to use them, remaining in a state of peace, which, in fact, is not peace. Post-war preconditions for the start of the Cold War. After the end of the Second World War, the Allied states, participants of the anti-Hitler coalition, faced the global question of the forthcoming struggle for world leadership. The United States and Great Britain, concerned about the military might of the USSR, not wanting to lose their leadership positions in global politics, began to perceive the Soviet Union as a future potential enemy. Even before the signing of the official act of Germany's surrender in April 1945, the British government began to develop plans for a possible war with the USSR. In his memoirs, Winston Churchill justified this by the fact that at that time Soviet Russia, inspired by a difficult and long-awaited victory, had become a mortal threat to the entire free world. The USSR understood perfectly well that the former Western allies were making plans for new aggression. The European part of the Soviet Union was depleted and destroyed, all resources were used to rebuild cities. A possible new war could become even more protracted and require even greater costs, which the USSR would hardly have coped with, in contrast to the less affected West. But the victorious country could not show its vulnerability in any way. Therefore, the authorities of the Soviet Union invested huge amounts of money not only in the restoration of the country, but also in the maintenance and development of communist parties in the West, seeking to expand the influence of socialism. In addition, the Soviet authorities put forward a number of territorial demands, which further increased the intensity of the confrontation between the USSR, the United States and Great Britain. Fulton Speech. In March 1946, Churchill, speaking at Westminster College in Fulton, Missouri, USA, gave a speech that in the USSR began to be considered a signal for the beginning of the Cold War. In his speech, Churchill unequivocally called on all Western states to unite for the upcoming struggle against the communist threat. It is worth noting the fact that at that time Churchill was not the Prime Minister of England and acted as a private person, but his speech clearly outlined a new foreign policy strategy of the West. Historically, it was Churchill's Fulton speech that gave impetus to the formal beginning of the Cold War, a long confrontation between the United States and the USSR. Truman Doctrine. A year later, in March 1947, American President Harry Truman, in his statement known as the Truman Doctrine, finally formulated the foreign policy objectives of the United States. The Truman Doctrine marked the transition from post-war cooperation between the United States and the USSR to open rivalry, which was called in the statement of the American president a conflict of interests of democracy and totalitarianism. Thanks for watching.